Welcome to Search Talk Live with search engine optimization and marketing experts Robert O'Haver and Matt Weber. Powered by the Robert Palmer family of companies.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Search Talk Live. I'm your host, Robert O'Haver. I want to thank everybody for listening. I know we were out for a while and we kind of took a hiatus, so to speak. But we're back, and we've been doing shows consistently now every week, bringing it. I mean, we're bringing amazing guests every single week. This week's no exception. With me today is my co-host, Michelle Stinson-Ross. Matt's out doing a conference this week, so he couldn't join us, but welcome, Michelle.
Hello, hello. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. What have you been up to? Why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
All right, so I am the Director of Marketing Operations for Apogee Results based in Austin, Texas. We are a full-stack digital marketing agency, and I am one of the agency's brand ambassadors, which means that I travel all over the country doing conferences myself. So this week I am coming to you from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I am headed up to Duluth tomorrow for the Zenith Marketing Conference.
Nice. Well, today, guys, we're talking with a person that is a good friend, and she knows pretty much everything there is to know about schema markup. And I've had amazing success with it, and I wanted to have her on because she's gonna do some follow-up from our previous show that we did about 6 months ago. But today our guest is Martha Van Berkel. She's the CEO of Schema App. Martha, how's it going?
I'm doing great, thanks. It's super gross and rainy here up in Guelph, which is just outside Toronto in Canada, but it's not snowing, so we are happy.
Nice. I am super ecstatic this week. I took delivery of my Tesla Model 3.
Ooh, fancy.
I'm super excited about it. I'm not to brag about it, but I'm just...
You're bragging. You're bragging, Robert.
No, I'm excited. That's all. It's an amazing car.
So what have you tested on voice search on it yet?
I haven't. Oh, no, actually, I did I do directions with it, but that's about it. And music, actually. But anyway, let's get to it. Martha, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Schema and your company, Schema App, sorry, and so everyone knows who you are.
Sure. So like Robert said, I'm Martha Van Berkel, and I'm actually the co-founder of Schema App. So I am very fortunate. I have a colleague and a husband, Mark Van Berkel, who is an expert in semantic search and semantic technology, and he's the creator of Schema App. And my role at Schema App is really to talk to people about this amazing way to translate your content into schema markup to be understood. And it really plays to my strength and background. So my background, I'm a applied mathematician and studied engineering. And then I spent 14 years at Cisco. So I have a really interesting background in from the service side, but in sort of large enterprise. And in my last couple of roles at Cisco, I kind of opened up Cisco Services API. So I speak data APIs. And then I did our online support strategy. So how do people find answers amongst Cisco's like large quantity of technology and results? And how do we sort of connect the dots to make sure people are understood? And this was, in early days of sort of online search and organic search. So it's been a really interesting journey for me over the last, I guess, like 5 years as we've become sort of more search engine optimization focused and sort of translating content for search engines with Schema App. And Schema App, we were just joking right before the podcast. So it looks like we had our early prototypes in 2013. I sort of say that our official birthday is in May 2016 when we first sort of launched the product for people to start paying us for it. And so we're coming up to 3 years with our company, and we're just super excited to be the super nerds when it comes to schema markup, and how we think about it a bit differently around knowledge graphs versus just sort of islands of code, and how that becomes really strategic for marketers, which, Robert, as you know, is my favorite thing to talk about as a strategist, and sort of how we think about using this and doing this in a way that that makes things really future-proofed for consumption by all these other intelligent bots.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how schema's changing in the next 3 months or so, but compared to like 2015, 2016.
Yeah. So back in 2015, like the reason we actually ended up moving into that direction is in 2014, Mark was actually at a conference with Aaron Bradley, so who is from Electronic Arts, is also a semantic search expert, and he was like, this thing's really cool that you've built, but like Google won't support it because Google doesn't support JSON-LD, and so it was actually in 2015 that Google supported JSON-LD, and for us, it became really exciting to say, like, what if we just focused on doing structured data, but actually we call it semantic search marketing. No one was talking about it, by the way. So that was like really fun, trying to get people excited about something they had no idea what it was about. And like it's so funny. Like I think back to some of the big companies we were talking back then, and they were just like, I get it, but like I don't understand the relevance yet. In 2017, I was like, 2017 is going to be like the year of schema markup, right? Like we've been doing this now for like 2 years, and while we were getting like better traction and kind of more people understanding what it was, like it still was sort of like the icing on the cake versus the cake in the SEO space. And then in 2018, we've seen a pretty substantial sort of uptick. So, if I think of, the adoption curve around new technology and its sort of innovations, like, we're the believers or the innovators is sort of who we were talking to in 2013 and 2016. We're slowly moving forward to like the early adopters. But I would say like we're still early in the curve up to what we call early majority, like where like everyone's going to do this and gets this. However, like if I look at my business and how it's accelerated, for sure we're seeing that like in I thought 2017 was going to be the year of schema markup, and part of the reason I got excited about that was that, we started seeing Gary Illish and others stand on stage saying like, if there's anything you do in 2018, I think he was at PubCon, do structured data. And yet we are still getting like, oh, I don't know. I don't think it's that important. And then, John Mueller, like in 2018, like just this past December, he's like, 5 of the key strategic focuses for Google this coming year from his webmaster tools kind of hat was like structured data was on the list of the 5, including, AMP and mobile and new search console, et cetera. And so, I don't think we're quite there yet. Like we're still slowly seeing the adoption. However, we're still, it's a complicated topic. And I think what's exciting for me is that, there's still so much opportunity for SEOs to learn and adopt and start thinking about this differently. And, in our last show, we talked primarily just about the future of structured data, but like I'm just excited that like here's a whole new area of practice, right? That really kind of covers both like data architecture, content strategy, as well as SEO, and then can position the SEO team in a really strategic place in order to then reuse this structure to accelerate like chatbot initiatives, or what we've been doing lately with a lot of our customers. It's been really exciting is that we've been taking their schema markup and adding it into Google Analytics for them. So for example, we've added, all of the bloggers, authors. So in our blog, like who is the blog that, who's the author that drives the most page views, for example. And, what's awesome is that like I still lead the charge. And so Mark, like the creator of Schema App, he's like, how are my blogs like not ranking higher? But if you're in charge of content strategy, like that'd be really interesting information, right? Like how do you actually look at, how different authors are performing instead of just looking at the URL? And then this can become really interesting as the business wants to ask questions. So there's just like lots of super fun stuff that we're doing. And I feel like we're getting the cool opportunity of disrupting, digital marketing and helping, and more importantly, like helping people learn how to do this. And that just gets us really pumped up. So the other thing that's changing, and this is like one thing I'm really excited about. So last year, was it 6 months ago? It feels like last year. We were talking about like this movement to where Google's starting to own the customer experience. And so we saw this like early on around job postings, right? So now if you search for a job, like you're seeing all the different job, aggregators like show
Yeah.
up now in Google search. Or like when I think about it, like when I search for a flight, right? Like I never go to everyone's site anymore. Like I just go to Google and I type in where I'm flying to. I'm going to New York tomorrow. So it's like, who's going there, what's the price comparison, and it just like tells me where to buy it. Like amazing customer experience for me. Now, not so great for those websites, right, who
Yeah.
perhaps like want to control that customer experience. And like with QA page schema markup coming up, then we see like Google's going to do like a Quora type of site, and we're already seeing that like through the featured snippets, like the answers in search. So the other kind of big disruption I see where schema markup is, I think of it as a control point or at the foundation of, is where, call it search engines, voice search, like all these kind of big players like Facebook, Siri, right? Amazon, Alexa,
Hmm.
Google, like are all trying to take control of that customer experience. And, the latest new structured data feature that's come out is employer aggregate rating. Oh, hello, Glassdoor, right? Like, so,
Wow.
so now, like, it's so, like, well, I actually really love it when I see these things because I get really excited because I'm like, holy smokes, this is playing out exactly how I thought it would, where, Google is basically saying, tell us about your data, and then we're going to actually own that customer experience, which then is going to ask the question of like, how do you actually license your data, right? How much do you give? And what's really interesting, I was doing my podcast with Nick Wilsden, and he's out of Europe, and he was like, GDPR is going to force like some type of control point to be added to this, which is kind of fun, right? It just like makes things more complicated, and for search engine optimized people, it really begs the question of like, how do you really use structured data to manage that brand? And I guess I'm just excited because I'm seeing some of these things that we hypothesized about kind of playing out. And the same goes on the chatbot space where, like we're very early in what I would call like AI chatbots, where like chatbots are actually like inferencing and understanding things. Like a lot of them are workflow based today,
Yeah.
or kind of basic kind of crawling data. So it's like just kind of another search engine. But as we talk to some of these like more AI driven chatbots, like they're building knowledge graphs or ontologies, and to me that's also exciting because like structured data done right is actually like the basis of that.
If you could take a moment to, because a lot of SEOs, they think, oh, schema markup, is that thing with the review snippets? It's like, but it goes so much deeper than that, and I would like you to kind
Absolutely.
of reach into that and kind of explain it to people that that don't know a lot about it.
Sure. So structured data is really sort of your ability to translate your content, to be, into the language of search engines. So just like you translate things to English to French or English to German, like you're doing this into kind of a standard vocabulary called schema.org, for the search engines to understand. And in fact, I just got off my webinar that we've just started doing sort of open free training on structured data. It's again a passion of ours to educate the market. And we talked about schema markup strategy. And when you think of a schema markup strategy, it doesn't start about like, step 4 of the strategy is looking at the Google features or the Bing features. Step 1 is actually asking the business leaders in the organization to say, what is important about our business to be understood? What makes us unique? Like, what are we selling? Where do we make money? Like, where do we want to see high growth, right? Like, the first step is really in understanding, what is it about the business that needs to be understood? And so, everybody who's like feature hunting, like just kind of looking at Google features and being like, oh, I'm trying to get stars, like, well, that's really great in sort of making the business case and showing what it is. The metrics are showing that like actually being understood and getting people to get to your business and to those right pieces of content or right pages that talk about those things that you need to sell is actually the most important thing. And so when you think of structured data, think of it as a tool in order to make sure that the content, all that investment you're making in the branding of the imagery and the words and the articles and the content, how do you actually then make sure that that's being understood so that these search engines that vary, your Tesla, the chatbot, the search engine, the voice search assistant, that they're indeed truly understanding what that is and that they're understanding it the way that you want it understood. And then And so that's really like the first step when you're doing structured data. It's not just about like looking for those Google features, but really, making sure that those important aspects of your business are truly understood. And then we often in the next step of our strategy then say like, well, how does that actually map into this like other vocabulary, and how do you kind of get specific about it, and does it then exist on the website? And the other key message that like we talked about today in our webinar was around content on the page and on the website is actually like so tightly tied to schema markup. I have no idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I shut my mic off. Sorry.
What's that noise? Not me, just me talking about schema. All right. So the other key thing is that like content is like tightly linked to structured data. And what do I mean by this? Like, so when you're doing a strategy, so for example, we were looking at our local hockey club, like our local hockey team called the Guelph Storm, that's about to like go to our conference championship, right? We're all in like hockey craziness here. Game 7 tonight for Toronto Maple Leafs. Woo woo. So when we looked at the Guelph Storm homepage, for example, like we were like, oh, that's really interesting. They have like all these great images. They have, a big banner talking about like the game that's happening later this week. But there's like no description of who the Guelph Storm is, like no information how to contact them. And so if we like, want that, that organization to be understood, like we should probably add a little bit more content to that homepage, or at least in the footer, right? So there's some context. And the same went for when we were talking about other elements of that site. There's some things that might be
I
important.
think we just lost audio.
Oh, I'm still here.
I'm sorry.
Want me to carry on?
Yes. Okay. We're back. Sorry.
And so like there's sort of this cyclical movement between like, what are you trying to describe and have be understood? And then also sort of, what is Google looking for in order to reward you with that feature? And then, how do you actually make those two things work and evolve your content in order to make sure that those things are working together? Because, so often people are like, oh, I'm just going to write the content and then I'll optimize what's on it. But so often we go to do that and be like, oh, well, we're trying to describe this this course or this event, and by the way, like there's no description. There's actually like no structure there to help you understand what that event's about. And so the robot's going to also throw up its arms and be like, okay, I have no idea what this means. I'm just going to go to the next result. So when you think of strategy and you think like, oh, is this like a nice to have, or versus like, am I just star hunting? Like, no, this is like you making sure that all that amazing hard work that you're doing to design the page and write the content and like pick out specific words that a brand wants related to them, all those keywords that have kind of gone out the window because we look at phrases and other things now, those actually become very important in the structured data, because you're then translating that into that language so the search engines understand it the way you want it to be understood. I recently, like Moz just updated their kind of basic SEO like 101 guide, and they have this pyramid, this like Moz hierarchy of search, and like the very top of the pyramid is structured data. And like I like to think of us as like it's the cherry on the top. It's like you do all that hard work, but like if you want the beacon to actually be heard, then you need to do the structured data.
Well, let me ask, I can vouch for, I'm getting an echo. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties over here.
Sorry, I'm just going to take a big sip of my coffee.
Okay. So I'm actually a client of yours, and you know that, obviously. But
for that, we are grateful.
Yes, thank you. But, to be able to, given that information where, your location, your geolocation, your product, your service, I can tell you from just one implementation on a legal website that I did, correlation, within 30 days, I saw a lift just from the schema when it was deployed. 30 days. And it's, you could obviously tell that Google's like, I see what these guys do. I see where they're located. I know what they offer, and you could see that because the traffic improvements we're at this point, it's at 4 times the traffic it had before. And that's just implementing schema.
Yeah, so we've been doing a bunch of work on like what's the ROI of schema markup, and trying to kind of look at like hard data, with regards to sort of what we're seeing as that impact. And we're seeing it range from, like 4 times, or like we talk about like 5% increase to like 700% increase. In fact, there was a client we just did some work on, and we saw a 1,200% increase in impressions in like a really short amount of time. Now, that one was really interesting because it was an AMP. And so we're actually seeing a lot of the impressions increase, like especially on the mobile site for blogs and news, like articles, happening less on desktop and more on AMP. And in fact, we're also seeing where on desktop, like you may see a decrease for generic or like branded keywords. So if, for example, you were seeing Schema app, we were seeing traffic for Schema app go to one of our blog posts, like now, we're actually seeing that routed to the homepage, which is like describing the organization. So we're also seeing that like traffic might decrease in certain areas where it's not the right content to be hit anymore. So you actually have to not just look at like the generic numbers, but dig into it and then look to say like, well, what are the search terms that are now driving towards this? And you should see those kind of like tighten to be more specific to like, what is this content about versus, generic, brand names or so forth that were perhaps, routing traffic everywhere because you had organization markup on every page. Now they actually like know which page is about the organization, and they know which page is about their products and services. And so I would say even just like in the last couple months, like we're seeing that go like, we're seeing those changes like even more explicit, especially around AMP.
That is another part that I did see is the bounce rate going down, because you're getting
I love that.
more relevancy,
Absolutely.
which is awesome. Michelle,
Yeah,
you still there?
Yes, I am, and I actually have a question. So I've heard Dwayne Forrester talking quite a bit about the value of markup and structured data, and how owning your own structured data is kind of the future of, where SEOs go when we try to convince the world yet again that SEO is dead. Ha 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 ha. But one of the interesting things that he said lately that really got my attention is that less and less traffic starts at the homepage. That because we're doing more work and more content writing around genuine queries that people are putting into search, they're skipping past the homepage experience and directly to the information that they're looking for. And I find it interesting that in relation to schema, we still need to be able to tell the search engine that, hey, this information is provided by this company or whatever, but I don't necessarily need to have all of that information obvious to the user who's trying to get a question answered.
Oh, I love it. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Would you speak a little bit to how structured data enables us to make an excellent user experience while still providing context without getting in the way of the user experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is actually like a topic near and dear to my heart, Carla, like around like connecting schema markup, right? So for the example you gave, like the blog post would have like a specific, topic that it's going. So maybe it's like how to make great gluten-free scones. And you're trying to rank specifically for that. Now, the publisher of that recipe, would very clearly link to the organization. So, one of the things that's really important is we call like nested or connected schema markup. This is actually what like informs a knowledge graph, is that, you don't necessarily, call it out in the content, everything else, but, that page resides on the website for, Martha's Muffins, and therefore, the Martha gluten-free scone recipe is published by them. So in the schema markup, you can actually introduce that context while also then, without disrupting that user experience. And like, Dwayne, fellow Canadian, he and I actually talked to State of Search 2 years ago, sort of on this topic, and are very aligned and sort of where we see it going. And, I would take it even to the next step, though. Like, they're not only skipping the homepage, they're going to skip your website, right? Like, when you get a voice answer, like, there's no one going to your website. And, this is, or, if you're driving your Tesla and you're asking your Tesla a question, like, you're not seeing the website, right? Like, it's a totally different user experience. And, I think there was a great article, and I'm forget the woman that wrote it around, like, how are you going to get credit in voice search, right? Like, how are they going to make sure that people know it's your brand, and how they do that in a non-disruptive way? How are they going to create that voice experience? And so again, at a data layer level, right? Like, let's nerd out. Like, you're doing that by sort of, making sure that your brand and this content is all connected, and you're nesting appropriate schema markup, and connecting things, across the board. And that's going to ensure then that it can survive and bring context and not disrupt the customer experience, no matter how they're interacting with that information. Absolutely.
Well, and I'd go further in saying that schema gives us the potential to take an answer to a question from just an answer to a conversation, because as human beings, when we ask a question and we get an answer, there's usually a follow-up question to that. And rather than having to go back and forth and ask that next question and ask that next question, obviously schema is going to put us in a position where once I have satisfied the answer to the question that you asked, would you also like to know A, B, C, or D? That's what fascinates me. And I think that that's probably where the brand impression is going to be the strongest, is how can I, as a brand, as a content creator, continue that conversation forward once I've satisfied the initial query?
So I would say, like, so this is a knowledge graph, right? So if you think of, I don't know if you know, like, Robert, you've probably seen my introduction slide where it's like Martha, and then I have like a bubble to the right that says, like, member of Cisco alumni, and then I have a bubble that's up and it says, like, I'm a graduate of Queen's University and MIT, and it has another bubble that says, like, I'm a founder of Schema App. So sort of like it's sort of like I'm the primary topic, but here are all the other related things about me, right? So when you do your schema markup properly and you actually start connecting the dots, so it's a recipe published by this publisher, like this publisher is located in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. So now I'm in Wikipedia, and Guelph, Ontario, Canada is a municipality of Ontario, and Ontario's premier is Doug Ford, right? So like, Martha and her company actually, are being governed by, Doug Ford's, government. That can be inferred because these relationships exist. And that's not, the schema markup like helps inform that, but that's actually the knowledge graph. Like, that's actually how, like the neural network that makes up Google works, right? So all this, like, what we call like inferencing, is able to happen because they've connected these like neuron connections. And so what schema markup's amazing at is, like, you actually, as an SEO, like, you can actually define those neuron connections. And it's like, actually, when you create those neuron connections, and then, like, actually, if the organization can get a knowledge graph. So again, this is like where schema app is very specialized. Like, we store everything in a knowledge graph because we see that, like, being able to start infer things for companies and for users is the future of how search works. It just happens to be that, like, Google and Amazon have been doing this for a long time this way, and we're now just like starting to sort of show up the evidence of how we can actually influence or control that.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to add too was, when I first started into doing the whole schema thing, it's a bit intimidating if you don't know what you're doing.
We should have a song doing the schema thing. Oh, I'm doing the schema thing. Yeah. I'm gonna record a video. It's gonna be funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It is intimidating. Yes.
And I really honestly do not think if it wasn't for the support that your company offered, I probably wouldn't have got through it. I mean, it's basically, once you wrap your head around it, you go, oh, okay, I understand. But, just, and your app makes it a lot easier too. I guess the point where I was getting at is, now, check out Schema app is what I was going to say. But
Robert.
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. No,
it takes time. It takes time to learn it. I think that's like part of it is like this isn't like SEO as we know it today, right? And it says the girl who's like the newcomer who knows structured data, right? So like, if you started asking me about, mobile details about mobile optimization, speed things, like I'd be like, what, like I know enough to be dangerous, like in the SEO space, but like my expertise is very specific in
Right.
this one niche area, and sort of how we sort of work with the other groups. But it is intimidating, and I think like there's I think you've taken our advanced training, Robert, that we basically like give all of our customers today.
Yeah.
Like there's you need to kind of understand a lot of what we just talked about. Like, why is it created this way? Like, why did they write this like vocabulary that reads like a foreign language, like in schema.org? Like why are they asking me to like connect the contact point specifications? Like all of this is because they're built. Get your head around, like why, how is this built and why do I do it this way? I think that helps. And again, we're trying really hard to help educate the market about there, because there's just not a lot of resources, and it's pretty complicated. And so we have the experience in order to help people learn, and we're going to do our darndest to do that.
Yeah, I think I wish there was some kind of, just kind of like what you walk through with your history, is a visual representation for people so that they would understand how the relationships work. If there was some way to do, like.
Wait for it, Robert. Don't like give away my entire roadmap.
And then yeah, and then also for people to understand what this does. Okay, so if I put in my location of Orlando, Florida, why do I do that? Or you know what I'm saying? Just kind of an explanation around it, like when you link off to Wiki or stuff like that.
Why are we helping define that?
Correct.
Yeah, it's we do you remember Clippy from like
Yes. Word.
Word.
Office, yeah.
I'm aging myself.
We
right,
just
like,
all dated ourselves for that one.
Okay, so whatever the cool thing was that people had is like, the early helper, like to guide you through different apps, right? So for those of us that used Word back in the 80s, we had this Clippy, and I almost feel like there needs to be this like Clippy for structured data, and we've joked like, is it Schemy? Like who is that person that guides it? And we're about to set out a brand new editor. So one of our product that we brought out in 2013 and then launched in 2016 is our editor, which like helps you do any type of page, any type of content. And our new version of that will, help a little bit more sort of as you sort of understand those pieces, and, how do we actually, introduce even workflow like into some of this is another piece that we've talked to a lot of people about. Like, how do you, we do a lot of work today on strategy where we're actually now talking to companies before they launch their new websites, because the content strategy actually is going to be influenced by what they're talking about and what the search engines have explicitly told us they want to know about that, right? Like they've identified 40 things they might not want to know about a topic. So how do we look about what's relevant and add that in? And so I think like that overall SEO experience and content creation experience and publishing experience, all of this is slowly going to start getting embedded in it, but we're still at the very early of that journey.
Sure.
And so those of you, Robert, such as yourself and others who get on in this early stage, like you guys are going to get a huge advantage. One, for the gains you're going to get just by being early adopters. And I think the other piece that's really exciting is that like it's changing really fast. And so, if you do a good job, when we talked about like that strategy, but like what is it about your business you need to know, like that stuff's being used, like even though it's not necessarily like one of the 28 things listed in Google, like it's still being used. And like Amazon's not even talking about how they're using structured data, but they're hiring ontologists and semantic web developers and knowledge graph people, right? So we know like Alexa's pretty good at answering questions, and there a lot of that is all being used, and people are going to even those consumers are going to be like competitive about what they share, because like that's their secret sauce, right? And how they do things and how they serve people. I liked Mike Grennan from Acronym Media. Like he sat on a panel and he talked about like we're really just providing service, right? So if you think, Michelle, back to your question around, like how do you ask the question and get the other questions? The question is like, how do we serve you? right? Like, how do we serve you as a human? And all of these things are just like us trying to provide all the little pieces that need to come together in order to provide you service. And we're all going to have a choice and kind of voting power through action on like, where do we want to receive that service? And today my voice search mostly serves me by telling me the weather, taking my shopping list, entertaining my children with jokes or animal noises, but like, how might my business need to be served by it in the future?
Yeah.
And so when I think about like the service aspect of it, like I think about then it's like, well, how do we really, when even if you're taking your car in, how do you actually give the mechanic the right pieces of information for them to best serve you, right, and fix your car? The same thing goes on in search, but the way that we're providing that information is through structured data.
Nice. Well, we need to take a break real quick.
All right, let's do it.
Now, when we get back, right now we're talking to Martha Van Berkel of Schema App. We are talking geek for the next 30 more minutes, and when we get back, we're going to talk about who influences the influencer. So, Martha, we want to know who influences you the most in this industry. So that right after we get back. Nope.
Welcome to Search Talk Live with search engine optimization and marketing experts Robert O'Haver and Michelle Stinson-Ross. Powered by the Robert Palmer family of companies.
All right. Well, we had some technical difficulty. We're going to add the sponsorships later after the show. But back to Martha. So, Martha, are you there?
I am.
Okay. I didn't see you in the camera. But we want to know who influences you, who keeps you up to date in the industry besides your husband.
I was gonna say Mark's a pretty big influence, right? Like he doesn't get a lot of airtime. So I mean, let's take a moment to give him some airtime. So
right, let's do it.
Mark is the brains behind Schema Apps. Let me just admit that online. Like he and the team here are who sort of make the magic work. And he what's interesting about him is that he brings like his passion for search engine optimization, but also this like semantic technology side, as well as data architecture. And he worked sort of as an SAP consultant and doing data architecture at the enterprise level before we started Schema App. And so, like what I like about sort of the perspective he brings is very different from mine, right? Where I'm trying to understand, like how businesses are doing this, and how does this like actually play into how a CMO is making decisions, right? And how am I seeing like all those pieces count? How am I actually seeing like this disruption of how people are getting service, right? Play in. He's looking very specifically at like, well, what's changing in Google, and like how does us having a knowledge graph and introducing machine learning and AI, like how is that going to change how we can serve our customers? Or today he was talking about how how do we start like using Watson and Google and things like to better understand like the context of images and other things. Like, so there's so much he's kind of picking up from like a different point of view. And I think like that would be that's sort of a theme in who influences me. Like I have just like ultimate respect for people like Aaron Bradley. I mentioned him before. For Bill Slosky, who's like so deep into the Google patents, like things I never want to read, that like he helps us understand. I'm also really thankful. I don't know if I'm influenced, but I'm I'm grateful and a sponge. Like Jason Barnard's been doing a ton of those podcast interviews with thought leaders and, getting the introductions to different people who have a different perspective or looking at different elements of search that I'm not, that I know I'm not great at. And so I'm just like, so grateful to sort of learn. Cindy Crum, someone who I want to talk more to. I find that both a female thought leader in SEO and someone who's looking at things in different ways. I've been really impressed with the overall SEO community and how welcoming they are in sort of wanting to also help teach and understand and include. And so the conferences I've spoken at, I'm kind of the newbie, right? Like I'm super niche in this space and I've been around a lot in structured data, but I still feel a bit new to the SEO community, and people have been so helpful.
Nice.
And wanting to sort of like hear my very different view on things, right? Like I bring a enterprise online strategist like view of, into this world of SEO. And, I try to, get into like, well, how does this relate to lawyers and sort of translate that. So, the big influencers I think are some of the sort of like deep specialists in their space, some of the ones I've mentioned, and just also sort of like, this is such a broad area. Like Michelle, you know this from your agency, like there's just so much to learn. Like you can't know everything. And so I really rely on conversations like this in order to understand how those things fit together and how we can make a difference, right?
Nice. I'd like to get you two in a room and just talk about schema. That would be amazing.
I would love that myself. And actually, it brings me to another question because, so for me as a content writer and as a social media person, so I deal a lot with the customer experience, the psychology of the marketing, all that. I tend to be the one to deal with the human side, where our SEO department is worried about crawlability and the Google bot and all that kind of stuff. And a debate for about the last 2 years has raged in our agency about, how much schema is actually worth implementing and all this kind of stuff, because my SEO team is definitely into the technical aspects of SEO and making sure that the page is crawled well, that the site speed is where it is, all of the typical things that we think about for technical SEO. And I keep asking them, well, what about schema? Well, what about schema? And our lead SEO very frequently says, yeah, well, I find limited use in actually using. I'm like, voice search, hello, and so I tend to argue for more schema, and I understand that implementation, especially on like a large e-commerce site where there are a lot of pages, that implementation of like big chunks of schema markup is a really time consuming, and it's not easy to do. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I feel like we're to a point where I need to make a data case for, here are the advantages we could be getting if we implemented a whole heck of a lot more schema.
All right, so let's dive into that.
Let's dive into that for a moment.
So first of all, I'll be quick. Like implementation isn't difficult if you have something like Schema app in your court. So we can talk about that later, because it is. I think people avoid it because it's a total pain in the butt to do, especially when you're in a larger organization and there's like 10 cooks in the kitchen. Right. Just the cost of meeting and getting the teams aligned is very hard. So we help. That's like one of the key problems we solve. But with regards to the business case, like Google is, like, most of their organic search documentation until they introduced AMP was all about structured data, right? So like Google's just like, having fun documenting like what they want you to do. Key people from Google have been standing on stage saying, do structured data. Now, they've been very clear to say like, at least do our features, right? Well, like, of course they're going to say that, right? Like that's sort of like what they publicly have published and what they have done. But I really think this comes back to like the business question, right? Like if your company that you're doing work for is trying to increase conversion and traffic, for their products online, like, and this is a recommended strategy from Google in order to do that, why would you not do it? Yeah. Right? Like to me, and like, and there's evidence, lots of evidence, like just type in Google structured data case studies and like Google's now showing evidence, not just around impressions and click-through rates, but time on page bounce rate and conversion, right? You can go ROI of using Schema app, like for us, and we'll, like, you can see our ROI numbers for some of our clients. Like, the evidence is there. It's just really a question of like, are you willing to invest the time because it's complicated, right? So like
Right.
where I see most people avoiding it is because it's like, holy smokes, like I already don't have time for coffee breaks. And now you're asking me on top of this to like delve into something that's super technical, that maybe a content role or maybe something that's in technical. It's kind of a bit of both. It's brand new. Like, no way, I don't want to take on that headache.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so like, and that's where like we frankly like work with a lot of enterprise where they're like, just do it for us, right? Like it is worth the price we pay you to just get it done. And like we still educate the team and they learn about what doing it, and then when they're ready, they'll take it on, right, to do it. But in the meantime, hell yeah, they want, one of our clients saw like 50% year over year increase in revenue online from his e-commerce store.
Yeah.
And they do B2B, like average deal is probably like $1,000 to $3,000. Like, like it's not a tiny e-commerce store, but it's not like giant, but like that's a significant, and the only thing you changed on the website was structured data, right? Like that's huge. There's like no reason why you wouldn't do it. And I guess like my whole question comes back to like, are you, if you're an agency, like, are you serving your client if like their top strategic areas for growth, like you're not using a tool in your toolbox that like Google very clearly recommends? And if you'd asked me in 2016, I wouldn't have been able to be as direct with you. But it's 2019, right?
Right,
Like
right.
even in 2017, I was getting bullish, right? But like we're in 2019.
Yeah.
That runway to be a leader and to like imagine, what does it look like to be the only ones doing that for a year? Like how much more revenue does that look like? And and is that worth, how do you find the right people to help you get that done? And I would say like the strategic organizations and innovators are doing it. That's who we work with. Yeah.
So, I mean, I wonder at what point. I know Google's always said that schema is not a direct, a ranking factor, but at what point can we say it's a direct correlation? Because I'm convinced.
Well, like you've seen the evidence, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
through your own work, right? And
Yes.
and we've seen it with our clients. Like I'm not a statistician. I'm no Glenn Gabe, right? Like love Glenn Gabe and like how he gets into the data. Like I almost need to like to be like, here, Glenn, here's our data. Like, can you tell us like if it's statistically relevant? But like we're seeing about like 10% increase. So like that, like it's like one or two spots sometimes. But when we were doing this in the very early days, especially with SMBs, we would see people jump pages, right? Like to go to the front. But it's like it all depends on the competitiveness of the area, and doing the structured data properly, right? Like having spammy schema markup or like stuff done very poorly isn't going to help us much.
So
Well, you know what? I think that the way I look at it, it may not be a direct ranking factor, but look, when Googlebot has two choices, and one of them it really understands because it's marked up, and the other one at least has all of the right words on the page. I mean, the words on the page match the query, and it's relatively sure that this does answer the question, but this other one has schema markup on it, and I really understand a whole lot more about it. Why wouldn't I serve up the page that I understand because of all of the markup behind it? So I could see why Google would still say no, it's not a ranking factor, but at the same time, the more the bot understands what's on the page, the more likely it's going to serve it for that query.
Yep, well said.
It's a confidence thing too, right? The stakes go up considerably when you get into voice search, right? Like there's nothing except the answer. It's sort of like, standing on top of the mountain and saying like, we believe this is the right thing. And I guess the other piece is just like, we're seeing the consumers like grow, right? Like Amazon's such a behemoth, like that's coming into the search space. Apple's already been there, Microsoft's starting to become a big player here, right? Like, so like all the big companies are trying to service and answer questions and do this. And I guess my question is like, so you can hold out, but at what point are you going to sort of embrace that robots need to understand? And I can help you make that case if you need help.
Nice. I would say it's worth it. I mean, now going back to where you're using your analogy with the hotel, when you buy hotels on Google, you don't really go to the affiliate sites or whatever, it may be like, at that point, I mean, Google kind of owns that. I mean, it's your data, obviously, but how do you overcome that? Because, I mean, is there control with schema, I guess? Can you say, okay, I don't want a rich answer? Because, I mean, there's some people that do, but is there a strategy around that? You know what I'm saying? With the markup.
I think today it's a sort of, do you want to play, right? Like, so
Right.
I don't know necessarily today is like, do you want to opt out? But it's like, do you want to play, and do you want the information to be correct and linked appropriately to you? And some of that's like the bots are going to figure some of that out on their own, right? Like, they're pretty smart,
Sure.
but like it's a means for you to be very clear about like the words you want used, what's your description, like be able for you to structure it for them. I think what's interesting is, like when you buy a flight, for example, it'll ask like, do you want to buy it on like United or Air Canada, and it'll give me the price difference. Or do you want to buy the hotel? It'll say like, these are the different rates. When I've been talking to some agencies that work with hotels, like they're working with hotels on like, how do they give discounts on the hotel site,
Right.
so that like more people will buy direct? Like, so this is really interesting, right? So like now the models around where like these, they were really using the channel to drive traffic and to fill their rooms. Now they're seeing that as like an expensive channel, and sort of like, how do they go back to the basics of, right, like people doing business with them directly and owning that brand. And so I see those as like interesting changes, and sort of like happening, and like it's a pure business decision, right? Like it's their margin is lower if if they're selling through an aggregator. And so at what point, what does Google become, right? Because like on some of them they had like pay with Google. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like where if you follow the money, where does it go? And like I always like to bring it back to like the business, because like the whole reason we're doing this is to try to get people to like have thriving businesses, right? Like that's why they pay us to do SEO. That's why they pay me to do structured data. That's why they listen to this podcast to learn, like, and see sort of how they can get an edge. And so, whatever we can think of as to like, how are they going to continue to have the money follow them, and sort of find the different things. Robert, how are they going to opt out and take control of that? I see sort of, probably licensing in the future. Like if, how do you like, fact checking is really interesting, or even like the data feed and Google, right? So here they're asking you to like share or license your data feed to Google, right? And sort of a data commons, or in like a central location. This is sort of eventually, and then saying, okay, interact with this data without interacting directly with the publisher, but the publisher is still known, right, and is giving permission. And this is like what Nick was talking about around GDPR,
right?
So to me, like, there's going to have to be data controls introduced into this. And when we talk, like, within our schema markup process, we talk about like strategy and authoring, and then we talk about distribution and deployment, and we talk about that very differently than most people. Like, most companies are like, oh, I copy and paste it into my page, or the plugin's going to do it. But like, there's so many different consumers who are, some of them playing ball, some of them not playing ball, that I really do think at some point, like, it's going to be like, okay, this is our data feed for our company and our pieces, and this is who I'm giving permission to use that in these ways to serve my clients. And so I think that's something we'll probably see happen over the next year.
Gotcha. And I have that was a good segue to this, my next question. Now, there's other plugins out there that you set it and forget it. Those type of the plugins that throw in just the basic schema markup, and then there's some new ones that have coming out. And can you kind of relate us to the differences? And
are you asking me about Yoast and you're just like beating around the bush?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm direct. That's the way I am. So it depends on your business, right? So let's kind of start there, right? So if you are, a company that has a local business and you have blogs and you have products, a plugin that's going to put organization markup ideally only on your homepage, optimize WooCommerce, and then add really great blog posting schema markup, or give you maybe the option, if you're a news publisher, to change it to news and article. You're great. Now, Schema app does do all those things. the new Yoast plugin will also do those things. And Yoast, says that they're the first ones to do ad IDs. Schema App's been doing ad IDs since 2015. There's a blog post that doing it. So, connecting schema markup's not new. We're really excited that Yoast has brought out, a plugin that really raises their game in structured data. Because for a long time they were putting organization markup on every page, and perhaps weren't doing the best schema markup in other spaces, but they've really improved that. So we're really delighted that they actually have robust schema markup. However, it's still like very much for like local business, blog posting. There's another one in there. That they do, which isn't all companies, right? So like if you write recipes, and if you have a medical organization, or if you're doing anything outside of products like they do because of WooCommerce, like that's not going to be a fit for you. And so, like where, it really depends on, that strategy, like what is it about the business you want to be found and, understood? And then what platform are you on, and what are some of the free capabilities that you can use in order to get a good bang for your buck, depending on your budget, and then understanding sort of like where are those not suited, because some of them, don't do a good job with schema markup, and I won't go through like who doesn't do a great job, but like just understand who's doing connected schema markup and who's getting those rich results. And again, like you only have schema markup about that one entity on the page, and like Schema App really, like we are like the comprehensive now enterprise level solution for doing this, right? You can do any schema markup on any platform with any extension, any pending schema markup, unpublished schema markup if we know about it, with expert support, right? And so that's, I guess, the other piece is like it really just depends on what type of business you have, what your priorities are for schema, and then who's the best fit. But I will correct Yoast in saying you weren't the first to use ad IDs and do proper connected schema markup. That's what we've been doing since 2015 and 2016 officially.
You heard that here first, guys.
Actually, someone posted it on Twitter the day they did the announcements, and power to them for getting great marketing. I'm always one to be like, oh, how do I do better marketing and get better airtime? But actually, it was someone who I don't even know if they're a customer was like, actually, I think you're wrong. Schema App's been doing this for a long time, so it was nice for again the SEO community to speak up and sort of drive that message across. And we're coming up to our official 3rd birthday, so you'll see lots of like happy 3rd birthday to Schema App, and
nice.
trying to take some time to celebrate it because we're now a team of 11 here, and it's been an interesting journey being a very, very early adopter, and I would say like the nerds in this space, like we're going to do it properly or we're not going to do it at all.
Nice. So when are we going to get your husband in on the podcast as well?
You should totally get Mark in on this. He sits across from me, so you just have to ask Robert. It'll be a very different conversation, but he has like just a wealth of knowledge with very different perspectives. So I encourage you to bring him on.
Very cool. All right, how much time we got left? So, we're almost out of time. So we need your schema tattoo. So, as you know, every week we do a Search Talk Live tattoo. Basically, something small and just precise that you can give us as advice as far as schema markup goes. Concise.
Thinking. Oh, 10 seconds. I got to time it. I would say learn the basics. Yeah, I didn't say 10 seconds. I was like, okay, I gotta move fast. I was thinking, I was like, oh, what's my I guess like the big message would be for me is like really kind of connect your schema markup, connect it to the business, and then connect it amongst each other so that it's a knowledge graph. And because if you do those two things, one, you'll bring amazing business value, and two, it'll be longstanding. It'll be what I talk about like future proofing. It'll be sort of built for the time and the ages as we see this like really fast changing world happen in front of us.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I'd like to say, if you're going to do it, do it. I mean, like dive deep into it. Yeah, just go down the rabbit hole and go as detailed as you possibly can.
Yeah, and ask for help, right? And when you have questions,
definitely.
We're out here to help.
Definitely, awesome. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show, Michelle. You there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Martha. It's been awesome. You're in Canada, right?
I am,
Eh? I like the about more.
About, I didn't say about funny. I don't know what you're talking about.
Not now, 'cause I called you out on it. But tell us where they can find Schema app, and if they want to get a hold of you on Twitter or something like that.
Sure. So I mostly hang out on LinkedIn and Twitter. So you can find me on Twitter at Martha Van Berkel, or on LinkedIn, Martha Van Berkel. Twitter, Schema app is at Schema app tool. And if you just Google Schema app strategy or Schema markup strategy or Schema markup local business, you'll find us. We tend to sort of talk a lot about sort of doing schema at scale, but www.schemaapp.com. And we're really, really excited about sort of this new webinar series that we're doing. We have a 5-day free email course on our website that sort of helps you learn the basics, and then just tons and tons of content, either using our tools or understanding key concepts in this space.
And in Google, either Martha or Mark Berkel. Van Berkel.
Yeah, Van Berkel. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks
guys,
for having me. Have a great day.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. Michelle, anything you want to add?
No, I think we're good here.
All right. And they can catch you where on Twitter?
So follow us with the brand hashtag or handle Apogee Results. We are Apogee Results on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Search Talk Live is sponsored by the Robert Palmer family of companies. If you have questions for Search Talk Live, or you're interested in being a guest or a sponsor of the show, email Robert at searchtalklive.com. That's searchtalklive.com.